Tuesday at 3, we have a trustees meeting at New York University. Wednesday evening is dinner with Miss Wagner. Oh, I forgot. Your sister from Indiana called yesterday.
Some years in television history don't just fail, they fail spectacularly. 2002 was exactly that kind of year. Networks were still clinging to the same old formula, convinced that what worked before would work again. But audiences had moved on, the culture had shifted, and the shows that premiered that year vanished so fast that people barely remembered they ever existed.
You think Uncle Bill killed that guy?
Yes, because he dawdled on the way to the bathroom.
Failed reboots, confusing spin-offs, and concepts that only looked good on paper. That was 2002 television. So today we're counting down 10 sitcoms that premiered in 2002 and crashed hard. This is the TV graveyard of 2002. And trust me, some of these will make you ask, who thought this was a good idea? Number 1, Family Affair.
I didn't know you were in the city.
Well, I called, but you were in China, so we just came to see you.
By we, you mean...
Buffy?
Premiering on September 12th, 2002 on the WB, Family Affair was a show that absolutely nobody had been waiting for. It was a remake of the beloved 1966 classic, a show that had genuinely earned its place in television history by running for 5 solid seasons and building a loyal fan base. But 35 years had passed, television had completely transformed, and this new version of Family Affair had not gotten the memo. The updated series starred Gary Cole as Uncle Bill, with the legendary Tim Curry stepping into the iconic role of Mr. French. Cole did a decent enough job with what he was given, but the truth is this show was almost entirely resting on Tim Curry's shoulders. The producers seemed to believe that Curry's star power alone would carry the whole thing across the finish line. It didn't.
So you're in the city to debut your new line? Tell me about that, because a lot of guys don't care that much about women in lingerie, but I think that's just wrong.
The premise was kept faithful to the original. A wealthy bachelor suddenly becomes the guardian of 3 orphaned children, and comedy is supposed to follow. But the comedy felt stale and outdated. The chemistry between the cast was noticeably off, and the show's overall tone was stuck in an awkward middle ground. Not quite a proper sitcom, not quite a family drama, just something uncomfortable floating between the two. 15 episodes were produced, but only 13 ever made it to air before the WB quietly pulled the plug. Critics called it lifeless and completely unnecessary. Audiences responded the same way with their remote controls. This was a reboot that survived purely on its name and failed at practically everything else. Today, the only real reason anyone revisits Family Affair is to watch Tim Curry give 110% to a script that never deserved even half of that effort. Number 2, In-Laws.
We've gone apple picking as a family every year since I was a little girl, and it's some of my best memories.
I know, honey, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Premiering on September 24th, 2002 on NBC, In-Laws was a show that wanted desperately to ride the wave of one of Hollywood's most successful comedic formulas. After the massive success of Meet the Parents, NBC became convinced that the same concept could translate into a weekly television series. The setup was straightforward enough. A newly married man moves into his wife's childhood home to save money, only to have his entire life steamrolled by his overbearing ex-cop father-in-law, who has absolutely no chill. Dennis Fina played the gruff, no-nonsense father-in-law with the same intimidating energy he was known for in dramatic roles. Elon Gold played the anxious son-in-law just trying to survive. Bonnie Somerville played the daughter caught in the middle, constantly trying to keep the peace. And Jean Smart brought her signature warmth and wit to the role of the mother. NBC went all in on promoting this show. Loud promos, primetime scheduling, aggressive marketing. But when the show actually aired, the audience simply wasn't there. 15 episodes were produced, but only 14 ever made it to air before the network quietly canceled the series. And honestly, In-Laws wasn't as bad as its fate suggested. Dennis Fina's screen presence was genuinely entertaining, and the show flashed real potential in certain moments. But overall, it was a TV adaptation that couldn't capture the magic of its cinematic inspiration and couldn't build a strong enough identity of its own. In the overcrowded sitcom landscape of early 2002, In-Laws became just another casualty and faded out almost immediately. Number 3, That 80s Show.
I've got bad news. Sophia and I are finished.
Aw.
Yeah, I've got some bad news myself. Kids, your mother and I split up.
Premiering on January 23rd, 2002 on Fox. That 80s Show is one of the most fascinating case studies in how not to launch a television series. If the title sounds familiar, that is entirely by design. The show was developed directly in the wake of that 70s show's massive success, and it even shared some of the same writers, producers, and behind-the-scenes talent. Fox was essentially trying to bottle lightning twice, and the result was one of the most confused and disappointing sitcoms of the entire decade. Here's the thing that made it even messier. It was not actually a spin-off, not technically. It had completely new characters, a brand new setting, and a much louder and more in-your-face 1980s aesthetic. But Fox marketed it as if it were connected to that 70s show, leaning hard on the name recognition to pull in the existing fan base. Instead of attracting those viewers, it only invited constant comparisons. And that 80s show lost that comparison every single time. The writing was broader and less grounded. The characters never felt as real or as lovable as the Hyde and Kelso and Donna that audiences already knew. The humor simply did not click. 13 episodes were produced, and Fox canceled it after just one season without much hesitation. The one genuine silver lining? The series starred a young Glenn Howerton, years before he would become iconic as Dennis Reynolds in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Some fans today actually revisit that 80s show just to watch Howerton and treat it as an unofficial Dennis Reynolds origin story. And honestly, that framing makes it significantly more entertaining than it has any right to be. Number 4, Baby Bob.
I need this. It has been such a huge adjustment for me, giving up my career to be with the baby full time.
Premiering on March 18th, 2002 on CBS, Baby Bob was exactly what the title suggests. A sitcom built entirely around a talking baby. The premise followed a married couple who discover that their 6-month-old son can speak like a fully grown adult. Not just speak, but wisecrack, argue, and deliver punchlines with the confidence of a seasoned stand-up comedian. What makes Baby Bob even stranger is that the character was not created for the show. Baby Bob had already made his small-screen debut back in 2000 as the face of a series of commercials for freeinternet.com. Someone at CBS apparently watched those ads and decided that a talking baby selling internet services had enough charisma to carry a primetime sitcom. That decision did not age well. Technically, the show ran for 2 seasons, but that description is generous. Only 9 of the 14 produced episodes actually made it to air. CBS quietly burned off the final 3 episodes in June of 2003 when nobody was paying attention. Critics were absolutely merciless. Audiences did not care. And TV Guide cemented its legacy by placing Baby Bob at number 14 on its infamous list of the 50 worst TV shows of all time. After the sitcom collapsed, the Baby Bob character resurfaced as a spokesperson for Quiznos in a series of commercials. Because apparently a creepy talking baby was better suited to selling sandwiches than carrying a network television show. Baby Bob remains one of the strangest fever dreams that early 2000s television ever produced. Number 5, Bram and Alice.
But is everyone in New York so self-absorbed they're not even aware of the people around them?
Maybe if we move the button.
Premiering on October 6, 2002 on CBS, Bram and Alice had exactly the kind of premise that sounds genuinely compelling on paper. Alice O'Connor is a young aspiring writer who moves to New York City to chase her literary dreams, only to discover that her biological father is Bram Shepard, a once celebrated novelist now living in complete faded glory. When Alice finally tracks him down, she finds a charming but deeply narcissistic womanizer who hasn't written anything worthwhile in years, is drowning in debt, and is surrounded by chaos of his own making. Alfred Molina played Bram with the kind of effortless charisma that made you understand why this man was once successful and equally understand why everyone around him was exhausted. The father-daughter dynamic had genuine potential, and there were moments where the show genuinely sparked, but CBS never quite figured out what to do with it. The network seemed uncomfortable with how dark and morally complicated the central character actually was. The tone kept shifting. The comedy and the drama never found a comfortable balance, and audiences were not given enough time or reason to invest in these characters before the show lost its footing entirely. Bram and Alice was canceled before it could find its rhythm. It is one of those frustrating early 2000s casualties that had all the right ingredients but never got the chance to actually cook. Number 6, The Random Years.
You know, that's a concession you might eventually have to make.
You know, Alex, I live in New York. If I sit here, it will come.
Premiering on March 5th, 2002 on UPN, The Random Years was a show that felt instantly familiar in the worst possible way. The series followed 3 college buddies navigating life after graduation, chasing careers, stumbling through relationships, and figuring out adulthood with absolutely no success. You had the awkward guy, the womanizer, and the everyman. They all shared a suspiciously nice New York City apartment that none of them could realistically afford. And most of the comedy revolved around dating mishaps, bro banter, and vague dreams of professional success. If that sounds like every other sitcom you had already seen by 2002, that is because it essentially was. By the time The Random Years premiered, the young roommates in New York formula had already been perfected by Friends and Living Single and a dozen other shows. The Random Years brought absolutely nothing new to that table. 7 episodes were produced, but only 4 actually aired before UPN pulled the plug due to catastrophically low ratings. Critics called it painfully formulaic, full of tired sitcom cliches, and completely lacking any real identity or point of view. It disappeared almost immediately and is rarely mentioned today, unless someone is specifically digging through the archives of UPN's most forgettable programming decisions, which, as it turns out, we are. Number 7. Imagine that premiering on NBC in January of 2002. Imagine that was a show that arrived with a genuinely interesting concept and then proceeded to completely waste it. The series starred Hank Azaria as Josh Miller, a successful comedy writer whose vivid daydreams constantly interrupt and bleed into his real life. The hook was that viewers actually got to see these daydreams play out on screen in wild, surreal, over-the-top fantasy sequences. On paper, it sounded fresh, creative, and different from everything else on network television at the time. And in many ways, the ingredients were all there. Azaria was a proven comedic talent. The concept had genuine originality. NBC had the platform to give it a real audience. But somewhere between the pitch meeting and the actual screen, something went badly wrong. The fundamental problem was that the show had absolutely no idea what it wanted to be. In some episodes, it leaned into quirky adult comedy. In others, it tried to be a warm and heartfelt family sitcom. And in others, it pushed towards something closer to a surreal sketch show. Instead of blending these tones into something cohesive and unique, it just became a strange and uncomfortable hybrid of all 3. None of it clicked. None of it felt intentional. NBC produced 13 episodes but pulled the show after only 2 ever made it to air. 2 episodes. Viewers barely had enough time to find the show on their guide before it was yanked off the schedule entirely. Imagine that as one of those rare cases where the concept deserved better than the execution, and the execution deserved exactly what it got. Number 8, Hidden Hills. Premiering on NBC in September of 2002, Hidden Hills was a show that arrived several years too early for its own good. It attempted to do suburban satire at a time when audiences were not quite ready for it, trying to carve out a lane that desperate housewives would later master with far more confidence and style. The series followed 2 couples living inside a perfectly manicured gated suburban community, navigating gossip, awkward social dynamics, passive-aggressive neighbors, and the quiet desperation hiding underneath all that well-trimmed grass. Justin Louis and Paula Marshall starred as Doug and Janet Barber, a relatively normal couple trying to stay connected as parents and partners, while everything around them descended into perfectly choreographed suburban absurdity. The show had an interesting premise and a capable cast, and in certain moments it genuinely showed flashes of what it could have been. The problem was that Hidden Hills never fully committed to its own identity. It wanted to be edgy but also heartwarming. It wanted to be sharp suburban satire but also accessible family comedy. The result was something that critics described as pleasant but completely forgettable. One reviewer noted that it was a show that seemed to believe it was smarter than it actually was, and that gap between ambition and execution was painfully visible in nearly every episode. 13 episodes were produced, and all of them actually aired, which puts Hidden Hills ahead of most shows on this list just in terms of survival. But NBC quietly let it fade out by early 2003 without any real attempt to save it. Hidden Hills was too racy for family television and too tame and conventional to stand out anywhere else. It existed in that uncomfortable middle ground where nobody was really rooting for it, and eventually it simply disappeared from the schedule without leaving much of a mark. Number 9, Wednesday, 9:30, 8:30.
Never miss a service. Listen, about John Ritter.
It's great, isn't it?
What?
It's not being announced until tomorrow, but he just signed a huge deal at ABC.
Central premiering on March 27th, 2002 on ABC. Wednesday, 9:30, 8:30. Central had what might genuinely be the most bizarre title in the history of network television. And yes, that was the actual title of the show. It was meant to be a clever and self-aware wink at the way networks marketed their programming, a meta joke baked directly into the branding. But for most viewers tuning in, it was simply confusing. And as it turned out, the title ended up being the most prophetic thing about the entire series. The show itself was a workplace comedy set inside a struggling television network. It followed a cynical and exhausted executive producer trying to keep a chaotic lineup afloat while managing clueless executives, temperamental on-air talent, and the endless behind-the-scenes insanity that comes with running a live broadcast operation. In concept, it was essentially 30 Rock before 30 Rock existed, a sharp, self-aware satire of the television industry told from the inside. But where 30 Rock crackled with wit and built characters you genuinely cared about, Wednesday 9:30 came off as an inside joke that the audience was never actually invited to join. The satire felt hollow, the characters felt underdeveloped, and the show asked viewers to appreciate its cleverness before giving them any real reason to care about anyone on screen. Only 3 episodes aired before ABC pulled the plug. The remaining 4 episodes were quietly burned off later that summer, long after the show had already been written off by everyone involved. Wednesday 9:30, 8:30, Central tried to spoof network dysfunction and ended up becoming a perfect and unintentional example of exactly that. A show that outsmarted itself right out of existence. Number 10, Watching Ellie.
Come? Oh, you're still there. You're going to be late, darling.
Just fashionably late, darling. What do you mean? You can't
I'm
come.
sorry, I'm stuck at work.
Premiering on February 26, 2002 on NBC, Watching Ellie was without question the most anticipated sitcom of that entire year. And that anticipation was completely understandable. Julia Louis-Dreyfus was making her return to primetime television, fresh off the legendary and era-defining success of Seinfeld. NBC promoted the show heavily. There was genuine buzz in the entertainment press. There were real expectations from audiences who had missed Louis-Dreyfus on their screens. And then the show actually aired, and what followed was one of the most confusing and disappointing unravelings that NBC had seen in years. The original format of Watching Ellie was genuinely ambitious and unlike almost anything else on network television at the time. Each episode played out in real time. 22 uninterrupted minutes following Ellie, a lounge singer living in Los Angeles, through her daily misadventures and the ridiculous situations that seemed to follow her everywhere. No laugh track, single camera, a tone that sat somewhere between quirky independent comedy and experimental character study. For NBC in 2002, this was a bold and genuinely risky creative decision, and that risk did not pay off. Not immediately, anyway. The concept was ahead of its time in ways that the network and its audience simply were not prepared for. Ratings dropped sharply after the premiere. Viewers who had tuned in expecting something closer to the familiar Seinfeld energy found themselves watching something far more unconventional and could not quite connect with it. After just 6 episodes, NBC pulled the show from its schedule entirely. But the story does not end there. NBC brought Watching Ellie back in 2003 with a completely overhauled format. Gone was the real-time structure, the single-camera setup, and the experimental tone. In came a traditional multi-camera format, a live studio audience, and a laugh track. Everything that had made the original version interesting and distinctive was stripped away in an attempt to make the show more palatable for a mainstream audience. It did not work. By that point, the damage was already done. 17 episodes were produced in total across both versions of the show. But Watching Ellie never found a consistent identity or a loyal audience in either form. Critics were genuinely divided, with most praising Louis Dreyfus's performance while remaining deeply uncertain about what the show was actually trying to be. The press began throwing around the term Seinfeld curse, grouping Watching Ellie alongside other post-Seinfeld projects that had struggled to live up to impossible expectations. In hindsight, Watching Ellie was not a bad show. It was simply a show that existed at exactly the wrong moment in television history. Too unconventional and experimental for 2002 network comedy, but simultaneously too tied to network conventions to fully commit to the bold creative vision it started with. It fell into the gap between two eras of television and never found solid ground on either side. And that is perhaps the most genuinely tragic story on this entire list. Not a show that failed because it was bad, but a show that failed because it was simply too early. And that is the TV graveyard of 2002. 10 sitcoms that came in with varying degrees of ambition, promise, and network backing, and left without making much of a mark on television history. Some of them were genuinely bad ideas that never should have made it past the pitch meeting. Some of them had real potential that was buried under poor execution or terrible timing. And a few of them, if we are being completely honest, deserved a little more patience and a little more time than they ever got. But that is the brutal reality of network television. Ratings are everything. Patience is in short supply, and a show that does not connect immediately rarely gets the chance to find itself. These 10 sitcoms learned that lesson the hard way in 2002, and most of them have been sitting quietly in the archives ever since. So let me know down in the comments. Do you actually remember any of these shows? Did you watch any of them when they originally aired? And which one do you think deserved a better shot than it got? As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.